So I'm just going to quickly give an introduction and then sort of set the framework for tonight. If for some reason you cannot hear me, please move up, shift your chairs. This is not a formal council hearing. This is meant to be a conversation. This is meant to be a meeting. The last two community meetings, one in Rossendale on Monday, Charlestown the other day, have been a little smaller, so the turnout tonight is much better. Thank you for that. But obviously that changes the dynamic. So please move up, please shift your chairs. And my staff is here to help you sort of do that if you're very uncomfortable about doing that. So I'm Andrea Campbell. I am the District 4 Boston City Councilor. I was recently elected. I was elected in January of this year. I remain honored and humbled to serve in this role. I am the chair of the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Committee. That committee was recently expanded. Before it only included public safety, now it includes criminal justice. That was intentional. I know those issues matter to many folks, including myself, particularly in District 4. So we added that, and I think it adds an additional component. Body cameras, obviously a major issue for the council. It was important to me that as we talked about the pilot program, which the mayor and the commissioner agreed to do before I was sworn in, that we have a community process. And what does that mean? Before we actually shape a policy related to body cameras, that we hear from you, your concerns, your thoughts, take that information back, form a policy draft, and then come back to you. The commissioner has put together a few folks, and if you're in the Social Justice Task Force, can you stand up? So the commissioner has put together a few folks who are, he calls his Social Justice Task Force, and they are also there to help him shape this body camera policy. And it's a rich, diverse group of folks who serve in this committee. So I'll have Father Jack Perrin introduce himself, as well as Lucifer in the back. And then I also, before we do that, want to acknowledge that Holmes was here as well. And if you can't hear us, please move up.
As the council said, my name is Father Jack. I'm pastor of 3 parishes in Dorchester. I have St. Peter's on Bowden, Holy Family on Hartford, which is off of Dudley, and also the old St. Margaret's, Blessed Mother Teresa, which is on Columbia Road. As mentioned, I'm on the Social Justice Task Force. Yusuf, you can introduce himself, but you might know other names as well. I'll say some of them. We have Susan Young, who's at the Bowden Health Clinic. We have Reverend Mark Scott, Dr. Rivers, they're off in Congress Square. Michael Curry. We have Judge Quinlan, Professor Ogletree, Professor Tidwell. I don't know if Jack McDavid, I know he's not recent, I don't know if he's a professor, but he's one of the more knowledgeable people in the whole area. We have Larry Mays. So it's a pretty diverse group, and it's also some of the brass from the police department as well. And we've been meeting frequently, probably every 6 weeks, on a number of different issues. We've worked with the cadet program. And this has also been a priority of the commissioner. And they'll be rolling out probably early July. They're looking at vendors now. It's going to be a pilot program, probably about 6 months. And then it'll be reviewed by some fairly significant people. We have Dr. Aaron Braga from Rutgers, who's also at Harvard, and probably Jack McDavid as well. My guess is some of you have concerns, you have your opinions. The commissioner wants to hear all of them. He wants to be as transparent as he can. He knows it's a new thing for Boston. We've seen things across the country, and so it's been used elsewhere. But we want to, unfold it here in Boston. 100 officers. There'll be a smaller, lead-in, and then get the reviews and stuff like that, and go from there.
Can you just introduce yourself?
My name is Yusuf Dibali, and I'm the executive director of the Boston Golf Course Center. It's the mosque in Roxbury. I just want to reiterate we're doing this because, as a community, as one community, we need to figure out how to do this right. So whatever concerns, feedback you have, please share that, just so that we can do this in the best way possible.
Thank you. And I see Councilor Lisa Sabu-George. She's going to join us and join me in prayer and sort of help facilitate. And although I'm the chair of the Public Safety and Criminal Justice Committee, she is a member of that committee, as well as some others, but she's joining us. particularly because we're in Dorchester and she loves Dorchester and cares deeply about this issue. One of the things that we actually did with the other community meetings is we jumped right in. We didn't wait, we didn't sort of say, let's have an agenda. What was useful about these community conversations is it organically just unfolded, which was actually a positive thing. So we learned about what people cared about most, which was privacy issues, retention, the volunteerism of the program, the number of officers, how they would be selected. We talked about a lot of these different things. And so I want folks to feel as though they can just jump right in. You know, because this is a larger crowd, raise your hand, stand up, say your name, versus just talking all at once. But I would say raise your hand, stand up, say your name. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a question. It could be a comment. It could be anything. These are the things we're going to take back to help form and shape the policy. So I might want to start with a couple of folks in the room. BPCAT representatives are here. Can you guys introduce yourself? I think that's useful. Also, if you guys want to talk first, a little bit about your advocacy for body cameras. They have their own policy, which will also be taken under consideration, but I think it's a nice way to segue.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Shagun. I'm one of the co-organizers of the Boston Police Camera Action Team, or BPCAT. We were founded in August of 2014 to develop policy for body cameras because we already need a body cameras in Boston. And then, this is Shakia.
I'm Shakia Scott. I'm the co-founder of BPCAT, or the Boston Police Camera Action Team. I also led the action team that went out into communities for about 3 months, just asking normal, regular residents how they felt about body cameras, what they would need to see in a policy to make them feel protected, and what would make them feel okay with body cameras coming.
So, I have 2 questions, and then I do everything to everybody else. So my first question is one that I've asked at these other 2 community meetings and hope to not have to ask at the hearing, is where is the commissioner? Because the father, you said that the commissioner wants to hear what we have to say, but it's difficult to do if he's not here. I know we have representatives here, but it's one thing to have someone tell you something as opposed to listening to what everyone has to say. So I would hope that you would respect the council enough to show up at the hearing next week to hear what people have to say. But the other question is, being a member of the Social Justice Task Force and the other member that's here tonight as well, rather than having people explain or ask questions and give feedback, I guess, for a policy that they're not able to see, would you both mind talking about the policies that you looked at and explaining things that you liked or didn't like in terms of like the big 4 areas of retention, when an officer should turn a camera on or off, who has access to the data, and any consequences related to misusing or using the camera. Thank you.
The retention, the sensors, the material will be retained. There'll be 2 systems in the cloud. They're going to be both. And there's a question about whether victims can see that film, and the sensors, it'll be yes. It'll be available. What is the other question?
Well, I'll answer the first one. So that question has come up at the previous meetings, and I said, well, I don't speak for the commissioner. I'm obviously not the commissioner. I did see him earlier today, and I think he actually intended to be here. He was in New York, I think, for a couple of other meetings. But there was an emergency with BPD, so he didn't call and say, I don't think I'm going to make it. But that being said, I don't make this meeting about the commissioner. For me, the council, in conjunction with the Social Justice Task Force, called this, and why this was important for me, at least, was to actually hear from folks about what they're concerned about, to make sure to bring that back to the commissioner, back to the task force, back to the city, to push for body cameras. So I don't make it about him, I make it about the issue of body cameras. He may have a separate opinion about body cameras, I don't know. But we will check in with him along with the Social Justice Task Force.
I will call and mention that you think it's critical or legal.
And as far as the hearing, I don't know if he's coming to the hearing on Tuesday. That'd be great if he does, or I don't know if the superintendent's coming. I'm not sure. All I know is we're doing a six-month body camera pilot program, and that I want to make sure that we get it right. On the second question, which is the policies. So BPCAT, ACLU have their policies. There's some similarities, there's some distinctions to those two policies. I have those in the file folder. I have notes related to best practices in Las Vegas, New York, based on meetings with the Social Justice Task Force and BPD. BPD actually sent some folks out to New York to meet with their officers to talk about their pilot program. Shockingly, it wasn't that great. But we have notes related to that. I have notes and emails from residents who care about this issue, who have thoughts and concerns about privacy, different scenarios, LGBT folks, so different things. And I'm compiling all those, hoping as we continue the conversation, we start with, say, retention, then we have all the different pieces related to retention, and we come with compromises. If we're talking about accessibility or turning them on and off, we have all the different policies related to that, including notes from the conversations we're having tonight, for example, in the community meetings, to inform those, to put together a draft policy that we then put out to then get further feedback. And I'm hoping to do that in your hearing form. Tonight is not a formal hearing, this is just a meeting. And that's intentional. I want it to be more informal and less formalistic, more of a conversation like the other two nights.
So is it possible to hear what they thought about it? Only because I think that if they're able to say, this is what we looked at, and and we're kind of leaning towards this but not the other, then people here can say, well, this is my opinion on this particular subject.
So a policy hasn't been formed yet. So right now, all these policies are on the table. There isn't a policy. So for me, it's
policy. That's
say
why
again.
that they look at a policy, which is why I'm asking them to talk about what they've taken away from those policies.
I mean, I think a lot of it was right there. In a sense, I think it was
Which is not much of a policy.
I think it's been a work in progress. I think initially there were some reservations. I think especially on the commissioner's part. And over time, as we've seen in other situations in the country, and as we've seen the importance of cameras in some of the critical incidents the last 6 months in Boston with the different shootings and stuff like that. So there's an openness. I think the concern all along is, people realizing they're on the camera. There's a camera's going out there. So one of the concerns running has been concern about privacy. If someone a police officer knocks on your door, should he say, should I turn the camera off? There should be some sort of conversation. So I think it's a work in progress. We don't know enough. New York really wasn't anything.
Well, I can tell you. Yeah.
Just first thing what I say is that, this has been a real process of learning. Personally for me, I would say Michael Curry in the NAACP has been really terrific in understanding the full details of how the rollout. I mean, because he's done a number of research in different cities. So I know personally I've been relying on his expertise usually. But some of the issues that we've discussed so far is, which neighborhoods should we roll this out? I think that's been a critical question that we've been struggling with. How do we ensure that we're not just targeting one particular place so that we have, should we just do it in Roxbury, not in Dorchester, or do we do it in Charlestown as well? And I think that's something that we could really use folks' feedback on.
And I'll add to that, and the response has been no. So why we did, for example, a community meeting in Charlestown, why we did a community meeting in Rosendale, was because the pilot program would not just be rolled out in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. So that was one issue that came up.
I think another is, just trying to understand, or at least we spent some time trying to understand what are the union ramifications, what will kind of the agreement with the unions allow and not allow, trying to understand that piece. Another is just when, and truthfully, we're just learning about this whole thing, but, another is when we turn off the camera and when does the police officer to turn off the camera or not. I think that's the question. When they enter the premises of a house, should they turn it off or not? So those are kind of, some of the critical pieces that I think we've been struggling. One of the things that I've asked, the police department in the past, is that part of this is just hard to understand because we just don't know how it works practically. And so to even have maybe a company come in at some time and do a demo, so just that the public can understand how it looks practically and what are, what is kind of the backup, where is the data stored? Like, those are questions, but I think to understand how it's practically implemented, I think would be very helpful for the community.
And I will add, related to how it works practically, one of the things that also came from another community meeting, and what we discussed was, once the RFP process is finished, and they have selected 2 vendors and the technology for it, to invite folks to be able to come in and actually demonstrate what it looked like, how it would be used. And I think this actually might be a good segue for Daley to quickly talk about where we are with the RFP process related to the technology, and then you can turn it back to the group and get into more of the conversation.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, my name is John Daly. I'm responsible for the technology part of this pilot. And so the approach we're taking is, in the pilot, not only do we want to sort of assess the use of body cameras, but we also want to look at the technology involved. This is a big project with a lot of moving parts, with big cost implications for the future. So we want to really understand the technology behind it. So we put out a request for proposals that's active now, and we expect to have vendors respond to that in the next week or so. We're going to take those responses and go through and pick 2 vendors and look at sort of the way they present the technology. There are some models that have cloud storage and they just provide a service from end to end. Other models, it's more of a hybrid approach, a la carte. We use some of the storage here, some in the cloud. The cameras might be from different vendors, things like that. So we want to get a sense of what's going to be the best solution for us and for the city, and to be sort of make sure that it's financially responsible, that it does what it needs to do, and that we can sustain it over time. That's what we're going to do. So that's where we are now. We hope to have a vendor selected in the next couple of weeks after assessing the responses, and after that we hope to get the pilot off the ground early July. Have those cameras out on the streets. At that point, we should be working through logistics.
Thank you. Kurt?
Good afternoon.
Hi, Kurt. Thank you for being here.
Not a problem. Because like the last 2 forums will say, you haven't had much of a policy to talk about, I am then going to get into the equipment. But first, I would like to remind you that even though the commissioner might be here, might not be here for these forums, at a city council hearing, you do have the pleasure of summoning him.
Oh,
So that I know that you know, but I want everybody else to also know that you know that you can summon him, and even if it does not behoove him to come this week because of other prior engagements, I would hope that a city councilor who is representing the district in the city that summons the police commissioner would come and explain himself, as well as in the last 2 meetings, the police union was brought up in terms of how they plan on, or their word, or they weighing in on the equipment that the police officers within the Boston Police Department would be using. It would be nice for them to be at these forums as well, but because you can't summon them to forums, but you can summon them to hearings. It would be nice if you summoned their respective unions to hear what they have to say on record regarding this equipment that the Boston Police are going to use. And then with the Boston Police, as Mr. Daly had brought up, and the limiting of, or the limit of the number of body cameras that are going to be available, have you thought of any other way of expanding that number, not by the number of equipment, but by the number of participants that actually utilize that equipment for the 6 months that this pilot program is going to be interjected onto the city?
So are you suggesting that officers would share cameras, so we get
Well, when I first
multiple
suggested,
shifts?
when I first suggested it on Tuesday, I said that it sounds like there's going to be 100 officers that have it, but why not have those 100 officers for 1 month and a subsequent other 100 officers for another month? But it is going to end up being, checking in, checking out, in particular because there are 3 shifts regarding when Boston police are patrolling. And there are a number of ways that you can get the maximum amount of data from the minimum amount of equipment that you have.
Right. I think
I'm not, like, after I left, I'm not going to be thinking about, like, I have other stuff to think about. This isn't in my purview that much, but I would be able to assist if needed, maybe.
I would consider with the 100 cameras, so if we start thinking about it that way, how we can best utilize 100 cameras. So I think for this entire time, we talked about 100 volunteer officers to wear the cameras during the trial, that there is some benefit in longevity for one officer to have a camera for a longer period of time, but we do have multiple shifts throughout the day, so that there is, I guess, the potential, and again, some of the technical pieces may limit it, but to using it 3 shifts.
And
And I will add, so you brought that up, and it was at the Charlestown meeting, and it was something that folks hadn't really thought about. That was a great idea. And so something like that, that's the kind of thing I'm taking down and saying, we should think about this. How do you maximize the number of folks, if we have 100 cameras versus looking at just 100 volunteers, how do you maximize how many people, how many officers we can engage with using the cameras? And that was something that hadn't been thought about, which was, yes, a great idea and something that we bring back.
Initially, it was going to be 50. I think after a lot of discussions, we've gone to 100. And I think New York had 25. So, I mean,
I think New York had 50,
they had 50?
but struggles, but they have a task force of over 30,000
So
folks.
we've doubled the amount.
Yeah.
But I think your point makes,
just quickly on that note,
And I want to make sure that we,
I'm not going to. But just quickly on that point, I appreciate the example of New York, but considering that New York has a heck of a lot more cameras on the streets, particularly in Manhattan, I commonly don't venture out into other boroughs as I'm going through, but particularly in Manhattan, there are a number of cameras so that there isn't as much of a necessity with the pilot program for NYPD to where. So,
thank you, Curtis. We're going to go in the back.
I don't know if it's time.
Bye. Thank you for being here.
I don't know if it's time to make an opinion. It's just a resident.
Yes.
Who's lived and worked in this city
Yes.
most of his life. I think the police body cam is a problematic issue for a lot of reasons. And I have a lot to say about it. I hope I can talk to you more about it more in the future about it. But I want to limit it to 2 issues right now. And first, I feel the use of cameras in general in public is a very potential violation of privacy of citizens. And I think to have, even to have police wearing, I feel it could be a violation of police officers. I think it's unimaginable to work in a situation where you're constantly monitored. And that's how these police officers are going to be constantly monitored. I think it will put a lot of stress on police officers. And also, I think there is, when they're aiming their cameras out at the public, there is a potential for people who are cameras are being aimed at to have their privacy also. That's the one issue. And also, I think body cameras is just a band-aid for a really deeper problem. There's no doubt that there's been a lot of police misconduct over the many decades that the police have existed in this city and other cities. And I really think body cameras are a band-aid. We really need to strengthen laws that will make police more accountable for whatever misconduct they do. And I think there's a number of ways we can do that. And I think body cameras is not the ultimate way to do it. I don't think it's going to happen. So those are my main two.
Thank you for sharing. And then we'll come to you.
So I just wanted to make a quick overview statement that I made at the other forums that I was at, that body cameras are not like a one-issue tool. And so I think that along the way, the message got lost that this is about policy and not strictly about the camera, because cameras are going to come regardless if you want them to come or not, because it's the next wave of technology. So it's more than the camera just capturing an officer doing wrong. It can capture you doing wrong to the officer as well. It can also show us smaller instances of police brutality. A lot of people think police brutality and they think somebody getting killed by an officer. There's a lot of smaller issues that lead up into police brutality. Stops, ticketing, being carted off to jail for the officer saying you did something that you don't feel like you did. And the camera can expose that if we're actually capturing the correct information or data on those cameras, which is what the pilot program is to expose. So I wanted to point that out. I do have some questions, and I want to go back to this point about violating officers' privacy as well. So when VP-CAT was composing our policy, we didn't just think of community members, we thought of the officers as well. We did have a meeting with the chief of police to get his insight and his feedback on our policy. And one of the things that we took into consideration is, of course, we don't want our officers driving around together in their car, having their regular conversations, and we hear what they say on camera. We don't need that footage. We don't need footage of them going into bathrooms. We don't need footage of them just driving wherever they're going or just walking around while they're on detail. We just need the interaction between them and the civilian to be captured so that can expose and give us insight into why the police relations with community is so strained. And it may not seem like that in everyone's walk of life, but we know that is a common theme in most minority communities. And just people who have had an instance with the police where they feel like, maybe I was harassed in that situation, or maybe I should file a complaint, but they don't really know. But now you have that camera there to show you like, oh, well, if I do have access to that, I can go look at it and say, you know what, I was wrong. That officer didn't do anything to me. That was just that I was really mad. I was, in a high tension situation. And then you can rethink that complaint against the officer or vice versa. The camera also solves a lot of lawsuit issues. Boston did, in the last 10 years, spend about $36 million on fighting lawsuits and paying out money on claims that could have been avoided if we had a camera there to say, that never happened. I never harassed you. I never used force against you. I didn't pepper spray you or punch you in the face or whatever the complaint may be. That's what the use of the camera is. So by no means is the camera supposed to be a solution. There's not one solution to police accountability or police brutality. There's a whole process changing laws. But if we don't have anything, if we don't have anything that shows us, that these things are happening, because I may say, hey, every time this officer comes to my community, they beat us all up. And somebody from another community will say, well, that officer comes to my community too, and they buy us ice cream. But if we don't have a camera to see when that officer comes into this community in comparison to when that officer goes into another community, then we have no idea that this is going on. So that's my main point about the camera. My question is, well, I have a couple, but I have one. Okay, good. Okay, fine. Sorry about that. So I do have a question about storage, because he did point out that there would be hard copy and cloud copy, which is great. Would it be third-party storage, and who would be in charge of the hard copy? Would that go through police officers? I do I did hear Mr. Daly speak about him being the IT, so I'm not sure if that goes through, the police are managing the
Or
data.
third-party vendors.
Right, and because, I only say that because when we were out on the streets, the community spoke, and one of the major things that they said is that, body cameras are cool, they don't have a problem with them, but if it's going to be in a sense where the police also manage the data, then they feel at risk because.
And we've heard that from a few different, we've heard it quite a bit, not just from folks attending the meeting, and I think it might be appropriate for Daley to answer that a little bit. It might also depend on who the vendor is and how it happens, but you might be.
Yeah, so I think the question is, who owns the video, right? Even if it's stored in the cloud?
Right, and who would manage it?
So if it was in the cloud, if we went with something like that, then we would be paying for them to store our video. So we would manage, the city would manage that video in the cloud, and when we needed it, we would retrieve it from the cloud, and that would be the same thing if it was stored on local servers. So we wouldn't be giving that video over to someone else to manage.
When you say them, could you just
Wait.
clarify?
Well, just to clarify, so this came up at a different meeting, and we were talking about the possibility of a third-party vendor managing, storing. Is that not a possibility for a permanent program? Is this just for the pilot program? Is that still under consideration? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
That is certainly under consideration for the pilot. So we would like to see what the vendors can offer us in as far as that type of a solution, and we want to see what they can offer us as far as a local storage.
Right. So it's something that came up, it's also very important. So although I hear Superintendent Daley, it's an issue I think that needs to be explored further, because I've heard many legitimate reasons as to why we should maybe think about a third-party vendor holding it, storing it. It also relates to cost as well. And so looking at the cost of doing that, storage, retention, that's where it costs the most actually to do the pilot program versus getting the cameras and the officers to actually do it. We have one here who has his hand up, and then we'll go to Jen, and we'll come to the front.
How you doing? I'm a Boston resident, lifelong, three children,
Thank you for
girl,
being
2
here.
boys. And my concern is more of accountability. And how do we integrate this new technology into a way of creating a firm, strong, more robust accountability system? And how, well, first I should probably say that the one that we have right now there's a problem with. So to go through all these technical issues and all the practical applications we're using, it kind of concerns me, because I currently have a complaint against the Boston Police against 4 officers. I have video, I have photo, and witnesses, and all these things. It took 3 years to get a letter from me. I've been to every state representatives, to Martha Coakley's office. I've been to everywhere, trying to get some level of accountability. None. Waiting to hear from the ombudsman. So, I mean, we see Eric Hunter choked to death. We see all these people shot on camera. They have this stuff on camera. Where's the accountability? So, if you're an individual trying to get some type of even civil assistance, it's a problem. Because really, civil attorneys don't even want to hear about this unless you're bleeding or dead. And by then it's too late. So, I think that we probably, as individuals, need to be able to put this on the news immediately. So individuals should have access to this information, or have access to the data, the video, immediately, so they can give it to their attorneys. Maybe something will happen. But I know the truth. I've called officers to come to my home, sit across the table from me, when I complained about this to other city councilors. And they laughed, they said, listen, like people tried to sue me several times. And it doesn't work. I've talked to attorneys, every single civil rights attorney in this city. Every single one I've called. this whole entire process just seems like, I don't mean to take it away from everything that's going on here, but you understand that all we might just be seeing is more people being abused. So, and with no action, so I just want to put all this stuff into the context, into the proper context that we need to have this discussion. Like how we as individuals use this to create more change, better change. And don't get me wrong, we need police. We need them. And they do a great job for the things that they do, great job for, saving our lives. Whatever the case, whatever they do. I don't know. I don't understand the job. But I do know that I've lived in this city all my life. And, I've had a number of interactions that weren't so pleasant. I've been 6'4" since I've been 14 years old. So I have a long history of interaction. Anyhow, I'm going to allow other people to get into this, but I just want to stress that it's very important that the people who are being accused of particular crimes have to have that. So that it has to be in their arraignments. They have to have that. It's absolutely necessary.
No, listen, thank you. And I will say, I'd like to sometimes bring in where I've heard similar concerns, and this has been a big issue in some of the other community meetings, even folks outside of the community meetings. This has been a big issue of how do we use cameras as tools, how do we use cameras as we're thinking about police accountability, and cameras is just one tool of accountability. How does this tie into redoing the co-op board, redoing investigations for internal investigations, reviewing the idea of a civilian review board? Josh Dolan, who's a public defender, is on the social justice task force. He cares deeply about these issues, using video, access to video to be used in courts, to be used in complaints. So it's an issue that needs to be talked about in this policy discussion that we're having. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here. And there's Jen here.
I hate to ask this question after what you said, which I felt was really, really eloquently stated, that it's great if we have film, but if nothing happens afterwards, then it's lost, right? But I want to go back just, and I hope it's a very quick answer to a technical question, which does in part revolve both around retention and privacy, which is I am hoping, or maybe assuming, that part of what you're looking at in terms of retention and privacy is how secure the system is that will be retaining this information. In other words, it's not a system that's easily hacked into, because, I'm assuming there might be all kinds of interactions or people who might be caught on camera that for whatever reason wouldn't want that made public, and I would hope that we're looking at ways that this can be stored in a really secure environment so that people from outside just can't hack into it and get whatever they want.
That's a great point. One that we don't have all the answers to. So many of the questions tonight are questions that we have to consider and contemplate. I will say someone in the Charlestown meeting talked about people not being able to access a camera to, for example, she was representing the LGBT community, not being able to access the camera footage based on something maybe hasn't come out, but is in a place where it would identify this person as being LGBT. So being careful about who has access to this information and whether or not it's stored in a place that's secure is an issue that came up, and something we have to consider.
Yeah, because one of my questions that I have about the cloud environment is how secure is it really?
Okay, I'm just going to keep going around because I know I said I was going to go to you here, right? So I'll go to you, then I'll go to Ms. Huggins, and then I'll come over here. And then I'll come back to Ashley. Come over so I can see you. I'll go to you next. Thank you.
My name is Kiara Mark, and then for Mr. Daly, I also have a question for
Say your name again?
Kiara Mark. I wanted to know if you guys, for who you are considering for the technology for the body cameras, if there's an idea of a budget that you're within for the technology, because we were eligible to, the city at least was eligible to let GE come in with tax breaks in exchange for grant money, to put money towards whatever else. So there's money, but it's just not being put towards what it could potentially be put towards. And I wanted to know if with the accountability aspect, if there's room for, because there have been some meetings about decertification for police officers, because in this state they're not eligible for that. But with the data footage, if through a separate council that may not be through internal affairs, but somebody to actually process the information to see if somebody is accountable and qualifies for decertification based upon the video that has been presented in an interaction that qualifies for something, like in his instance where he's pled to somebody to come speak for something he has video footage for, if there's a way to have a third party be responsible for qualifying whether or not somebody is eligible for a decert at that point. I know that's not something that's set in stone or super talked about or whatever the case may be, but I feel like if body cameras do come into play with the technology, if we have regular cases of police misconduct or whatever it may be, that that would be a step to proceed towards the seriousness of decertification, because a lawyer can lose their job, a doctor can lose their job, but you can be, not to say any of the police officers in this room are terrible at their job, but you can be a terrible officer and just switch to a different place, and nobody knows.
So, 2 questions there. I'll take the second one into decertification. The first one, so there has been currently in the city of Boston's budget, this $500,000 allotted just for the pilot program. Based on the number of cameras, and it looks like we won't need all of that, the $500,000. And so Jerry can talk a little bit about the cost of the cameras. So there'll actually probably be money left over. And then I'll let you talk about that, and I'll segue to decertification actually to Rep. Holmes, who can talk a little bit about that issue, which is a big one.
So on the procurement side, we haven't received the responses from the vendors yet, but we expect that they will be low cost. We allowed for up to $10,000 per vendor for each one of them in the pilot. And then there'll be additional costs for project management, assessment services, things like that. But we don't think that the pilot itself is going to use up all the money. We're trying to do be responsible with the pilot, and we know that the vendors are anxious to prove their, to show us what they can do. So I don't think they're going to charge us a lot of money for this pilot.
And I will say separately, I know that we all the potential funding that's available for a pilot program, for body cameras generally. So as we think about a permanent program, one, we have a thorough cost analysis of what it would cost. So obviously that has to be done. But separately, my office and the committee are looking at what potential funding is out there. There's some funding available at the state, there's some funding available at the federal level, there's an NHC grant, NIH grants. So there's money out there, so we're compiling a list of what's out there. Is it long-term, is it short-term? And then of course, the more tougher questions will be budget allocation, union conversations. So we're continuing that thinking forward. Right now, there is $500,000 budgeted. The pilot program is covered. On the DC one.
Yeah. When those when the proposals come back into you, I think that what Jen was saying about the safety piece, the cybersecurity, that we pay particular attention to what the vendors are saying about that, and that we check the merits of that security.
And then, so on the decertification piece, which is a slightly separate issue than body cameras, decertification has to do with, so I'm by training a lawyer. So I had to fill out a bar application, I had to go through a screening process, I had to take the bar exam to get certified, and then if I actually do some illegal stuff, I could be disbarred. And so around the country, there's actually one guy who's going around the country, this is his issue, and looking at how do we get officers to have to go through a similar system. So for example, if you are certified as an officer and you do conduct that reaches a certain threshold of just severity of misconduct, that you now are eligible to be decertified as a police officer and can no longer be a police officer, not only in this state, but in others. Why this is a good segue to our polls is because this is an issue we actually have taken up on the State House side, and I'd love you to talk about that and also the body camera side. Thank you.
So again, I'm Russell Holmes, I represent Quantum Valley, which is my Quantum. And it is what we call as decertification, hasn't been the lead on decertification. It's been called POST. It's called Police Officer Standard and Training. There's a certain level of expectations that we want to make sure that all police officers have across the Commonwealth. And so as a part of that, as mentioned by the council, we are only one of 6 states that have not done what we can define as decertification. And so the important thing about that is we're one of the big 3. So we don't have California do it, you don't have Massachusetts do it, you don't have New York do it. In a lot of ways, the things that move the most just because of population, it hasn't happened really yet in the country. There have been thousands of police officers that have been decertified, but embedded inside of that isn't always just activity around what happened between a police officer and a constituent. A lot of it even happens just what we saw the other day, unfortunately, for me as a state person, with the state police. There's been a lot of domestic violence, a lot of things that happen, unfortunately, with folks who may have been working on the street and police officers take advantage of them. We've seen that as well. So some of it has just been around just domestic violence and how we handle prisons. And so we are in a stage where we did do it out of committee this year. So this legislation had been proposed several times, but then we have gathered legislation out of committee this year, and we're hoping to at least get it done. So we have had some conversation with the commissioner around what is certification, because a lot of it, if you look at Superintendent Holmes, she has an awesome training program in the city. And so the question is, do we just certify Commissioner Holmes' program to have it so that it's certified? Because she's not only just doing here in Boston, she's doing even some of the regional folks. So we're trying to figure out, is it just certifying the program? We have a very large program like we have here in Boston, and then what does that mean when someone violates it? So that is decertification. We're working on it. We're trying our best to get it done as a part of Police Officer Standard and Training, which is the acronym is POST. The other thing that I guess I'll take a moment and just talk about is that we here, I'm also the chair of the Black Latino Caucus. I just wanted to simply say we are adamant as a caucus that we believe that we should have cameras on our police officers. So when you say, is it going to be a volunteer program, I went out to the largest vendor, I won't use any names because I guess that's what we're trying not to do, but the largest vendor, there's the largest vendor of cameras by far. When I went out to go see them in their operation out in Scottsdale, it was clear that the thought is a camera doesn't just stay with a person. The camera comes back to the police station, it docks, someone else grabs that camera, someone else uses it. And so when you're talking about whether or not it should just stay with one person, I think adamantly we should say yes, it should rotate. Because that's how we're going to end up seeing it, I think, in practice in the end. You're not going to go out and buy for every police officer in the city a camera, but that camera will then stay with them. So they design these cameras and the equipment to be robust. They know it's a police officer. They know they're going to be fighting with folks. They know they're going to have this situations. And so grab the cameras, grab the equipment, dock it. And I think what we heard in Charlestown, what Curtis said is excellent. I mean, so not only do you do it by just like B3 or C11 doing it, but then take it over to E18 for a while. And take it from E18 to different districts. So I think, and you should use the same cameras to do that, just so people can see how does one person interact with it versus another person interact with it. And then to the gentleman that said, well, it is like a bad thing and so much pressure for police officers to be on the camera. Almost every retail shop you know, from CVS to Best Buy to the local bodega, has someone on the essentially surveillance in every single direction. Particularly, you look at someone at the cashier, that person, every time they're in and out of that register, many folks have them on the surveillance. And so here it is, a person that we're paying hopefully $15 an hour, $10 an hour, $9 an hour is under essentially so much stress, but some of our officers are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So we're saying we can't pay the person who makes substantially much more money to handle the stress that we're trying to get someone who is at $10 an hour, $12 an hour. So I just don't, that doesn't seem correct that they can't be under essentially stress, because when I went to the academy, they shut me down, but when I went to the academy, they say one of the things you do as a community, as a part of the community academy, is they say go into this door. They have like a little flashing light, and basically you're pretending as though you're walking into an environment that you don't know what's behind that door. And it teaches you what a police officer walks into every single day, and then know what's on the other side of the door. They're already in very stressful situations. I'm sure they can handle turning on the camera as well. So I'll just finally say, in the hook, that we are absolutely ready to change legislation as needed to make sure that we handle the way we handle what we call two-party consent, which is to say whether or not you need to have permission or not, and we want to go and record people. We're absolutely ready to do it at the state level, and we're also just willing to be as cooperative as possible to make sure we have the strongest and most robust pilot program that we can have. And I think everyone needs to be on the camera. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Ms. Huggins over here.
Okay,
Thank you, Ms. Huggins.
let me flip the script a little bit for a few minutes. I'm listening to you all talk here. In the first place, I want to know, I'm gonna tell you something. You see these gentlemen sitting and the lady sitting here? I don't have no problem. Because you know something? If some of this what we were talking about is to talk to the people out there that they have to deal with. You know we need a camera, because we the one that need the help. Okay? Because I'm saying to myself, the money that you're talking about to do this, I think you need some of that money to train us how to treat the officers. Now let's tell the story like it's supposed to be told. Because we could be a problem ourselves. And when they tell you to sit down, guess what? You need to sit down. They tell you close your mouth, close your mouth. No. Because sometimes you put your own self in the predicament that you're in. I mean, you may say no, but you get as old as I am. You don't know what no means. But
in order to maintain a respectful conversation, everyone has a separate opinion.
I have it.
So you're going to share. Please don't interrupt. Just let everyone share. Everyone has their own unique experience, their own perspective, how to respect with each other.
Yeah.
Please let each other share.
All right, and I want to say something else. I'm a who, why, and what person. Okay? First, I know you won't have the time to do it, but number one, I'm here in something that I haven't heard about. First of all, what brought this about? That we need cameras on our officers. Number one. Number two, why are we doing this? Okay? Number three, how are you going to finalize with all of these meetings and all this information that you hear to come up with the right decision? Putting cameras on the officer is the right thing to be done. Okay, get that back to me. Then I can say the meeting is well worth it.
I will. I know what you did. I know what you're doing. But I will say this. I will say this. Love you, Ms. Huggins. I will say this. So in terms of, so the pilot program is happening. The body camera pilot program is happening. That was agreed to before I became the city council for District 4 and was chairing the public safety committee. So this meeting is really about taking these thoughts and ideas, including some of what you said, and getting the pulse of others as well, and different perspectives, bringing that back, but more importantly, listening to these pieces that could inform and shape policy. So I will continue to talk with you separately offline. I also think there's a few other people, including the young lady right here, a few other people that I think it's worth you connecting with and maybe bringing to your civic association meeting so they can talk to you about why they thought cameras was important and stuff like that. So before we leave, I want to connect with her.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Huggins. Right here. Say your name.
Jillian Simons. So I had a few questions, but I know you're trying to get to everyone, so I'll limit this to just the program. Just looking at this fact sheet. So where volunteers that are going to participate, it's going to be 100 patrol officers. So I guess I had kind of one concern was about the vetting process. And then also, just as general practice, when you have volunteers, it's usually people who have made nothing to hide, model or exemplary employees, and perhaps more senior or at least at a mid-level. But what will be done to ensure that these 100 officers will come from a variety of levels of seniority, that you don't just have model officers, but perhaps those with infractions, so that you kind of get a variety of perspectives. And then with that, because this is a pilot to decide whether full citywide implementation is best, I don't understand what the measure of success is. I mean, down at the bottom, it talks about a cost-benefit analysis. But what does that include? Are we looking to see, did we catch either a citizen or an officer doing something? And if we catch it one time on camera and it's undisputed and there's no contradictory evidence, therefore it's successful? Is this just to show that we have confidence and trust in one another? So it's a relationship building tactic? So I guess I don't understand beyond the 6 months when you sit down and you analyze this one report, what's going to be the measure of success to determine if this moves forward? And if so, to what capacity?
Thank you. So I'll take the first part first, which is sort of related to the volunteerism. Thank you for your questions. Volunteerism has come up. For some folks, that makes no sense. This is done with, this is stupid. For me, this is what the pilot program has to be. It hasn't been negotiated with the unions. The unions currently are in negotiations with the commissioner, with the mayor's office. As a council, we're not privy to those negotiations for obvious reasons. We're in the council of a different legislative body. So that being said, they're having talks about what this would look like permanently. They might be negotiating this as a permanent program. So it's volunteer because it would change the mandatory working condition of the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement. And if without negotiating, we can't then impose certain working conditions on them. And believe it or not, asking an officer to shoot mandatory to take the camera is mandatory bargaining, so you have to bargain issues. That being said, separately, I am, as the public safety chair, looking into what other options are available. Because this question has come up so much, does it have to be negotiated? Is that a matter of fact, is that 100%, rather than just accepting that as true? Putting the lawyer hat on a little bit and seeing if, for example, last year there was an ordinance filed with the council. That ordinance was filed with the council, and then the term ended, and we moved on. So I'm still curious as to if you filed an ordinance for a camera policy, can you actually impose that on officers without going through the unions? And I'm hearing that that's not the case. So my office is actually looking into that issue a little deeper. The volunteerism is what we got. So my goal is work with what we got. How do we make sure we get the best program, the most robust program, based on what we're hearing from folks? How do we work out a legitimate, real policy that can work, that can inform some of these measures of success? We have not figured out all the measures of success. I'm not doing the analysis, Anthony Braga is. Jack McDevitt, who's also at Northeastern University, who's actually a person that we involved with and have a conversation with. If you have ideas related to measures of success, I think he would love to hear from you. He was at the 2 other previous meetings, and people really liked what he had to say about those issues. But pieces of the measures of success are, yes, does it change the way in which officers engage with civilians, and vice versa? Does it build confidence and trust? Do we see a downward turn when it comes to police misconduct complaints or lawsuits or anything during this period of time out of these certain precincts or divisions? So there are different measures of success. The whole volunteer piece. If we only get officers who have a quote-unquote good record, then that would have to go into the report. This analysis may be flawed because all of the officers who volunteered all had decent records. Or we actually got a robust group of officers who volunteered with mixed seniority, mixed levels of complaints. One of the things that came up at one of the community meetings previous to this one was in New York. Someone said, well, how did they get them to volunteer? Someone said voluntold. So some captain, Captain Hussein is here for B3, I want to recognize him, this is awesome. And he literally, they said voluntold, so that means a captain could say, you're doing this. Having looked at what their record is within their department, their precinct. So there's a lot of creative ways thoughts going into it, but it's definitely a big issue that still is being worked out. And the conversations are actually being helpful with that.
I want to add that some of the other measures of a pilot program are the durability of the equipment, the ease of use, the storage questions, the policy pilot. We've got to test some of those pieces too. Is this, when that officer shows up at the front door, is the camera on initially, or does it get turned on after that door is open? The initial policy may have it one way, and then after that pilot program, we decide, no, it really needs to be the other way, we have to test it the other way. What's important to me is whatever the policy is that we decide for the pilot portion is a dynamic document, that it's something that we can go back and revisit and work to improve as incidences arise or experiences sort of educate us on how it could work better in the city of Boston. So there's multiple measurements of success. I don't think any one of them trumps another, and that we need to be able to look at them all together.
And I think one thing that came up and that Jack really spoke about was being thorough, whatever results we put out. And my vision is to continue to have, whether it's community meetings or council hearings, all along this process, so that post-pilot program, there's a study, actually release that study and sit down and talk about what was in that. So being honest and transparent about all of the good things and bad things that came out of the pilot program. Volunteerism didn't work out great, or it actually worked out okay. We don't know. But making sure that we make sure that that is in the results informs the conversation going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Rasan, and then I have Ashley, and then I have Mary. So we're, the hearing lead? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Ashley.
Hi.
And then we'll go to Mary.
Hi, Ashley Brown, Boston and the Lacey.
And thank you for being here, Ashley.
Yes, thank you so much. Boston and the Lacey. One thing that's really important to us is to have a thorough process, and not just to sort of go through a pilot that just kind of goes through the exercise, but we really want to see a thorough process, one that's packed with accountability, packed with transparency. So my question is, and I apologize if this was answered in a previous form, but the question is about the data once you have it, and if you see an interaction that violates a rule or a police department misconduct of some sort, will actually be taken from information that's gathered during the pilot, or is this just sort of an opportunity to capture and sort of run the technology? And so that's my question. If there is misconduct that is seen on the video footage by an officer during this pilot period, will there be disciplinary action of any sort or any kind of follow-up that we can see the pilot work to its full extent, or will we just be mainly going through the exercise of running technology?
So that question came up a few times, and just like any complaint that's filed in this kind of case, it will be processed as BPD currently processes this kind of cases. So there is no, right, they do them internally, they don't, like a supervisor can see something, so that doesn't change the response. There is no, you get off the hook because you're participating in the pilot program.
And the victim has access to video.
Yes, and the victim is allowed to have access to the video.
Thank you very much.
And then we'll keep coming around.
Son Hall, American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. I think there's been a lot of talk around the policy, and I understand that there's not one for the pilot, and that's the purpose of this community meeting, to get feedback from the community. So one of the things, it's a plug, but I feel like it's important for people to have an idea of what a policy would look like. In addition to BPCAT, who submitted a model policy to City Council and to the Boston Police and to the Mayor, the ACLU has a model policy that's very similar to BPCAT. It's found on our website, aclum.org/CAMS.
I will also say we've been handing out at the communities copies of BPCAT's model policy. I'm not sure if we have ACLU's fact sheet, but if we have the policy, we've been putting that out as well. So please take that.
So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So the things that should be important and that I hope the community members share with the council about what a policy should look like, because that's what this is about. What do you want the policy to look like? So it should be, when is the camera turned on? From our perspective, it should be turned on whenever officers are responding to a call or involved in investigative work. Now, whether or not they're dealing with a confidential informant or somebody's making an anonymous tip, that's something separate. Or if they're entering a home, they should have consent to report when they're entering into a home, particularly where they're dealing with sensitive victims, victims of sexual assault, victims of domestic violence. The next question is, what happens to the footage? There have been some questions about that. How long should it be stored? In our perspective, it should only be safe for 6 months, then delete it. If it needs to be shared, then it can be, the footage can be blurred to protect people's privacy, unless it's tagged or flagged for an instance of excessive force or police misconduct. It's evidence in the officer's work in making an arrest, or if it's been flagged for some other reason. But it shouldn't be held for longer than 3 months if it's been flagged. The next question is, who has access to it? No one should have access to it but the police. There shouldn't be the ability for it to be shared with third parties. There shouldn't be any type of analysis, biometric analysis done. There shouldn't be facial recognition scanning or retinal scanning done of video footage. There shouldn't be live video streaming of the body-worn cameras to protect people's privacy. And finally, there should be a strong disciplinary policy in place for officers who do not comply with the policy that's in place. So these are just some of the things that we should begin to be thinking about and sharing with the City Council to give them good feedback about what we want the policy to look like. So it can really address some of the concerns that brought about why we even have body-worn, or this conversation about body-worn cameras, the number of police killings, the number of complaints of excessive force that are disproportionately lodged by people in communities of color, and the lack of video footage when there's a questionable police shooting. We've had video footage where the police were exonerated, but there's been several killings in the city of Boston by Boston Police Department where the police have been exonerated, but there hasn't been footage back. So that's something else. So my question is...
There's a question?
There's a question. I try to honor that. Is this pilot to test the equipment, or is it to test the efficacy and the accountability of body cameras? Other states or cities that have tried it have seen a reduction in complaints about use of force. They've seen a reduction in claims of excessive force. So are we looking, and people raised the study that was done with the pilot in New York. My understanding is that pilot was to test the equipment, but not really whether or not body cameras are really good ideas.
I would say both and. So I think the purpose of having two vendors and two types of technology is a piece of that. I think the efficacy, doing analysis, having Anthony Browning do these sort of measures and determine what they are. So I would say it's both. I want to go back to what you were saying in the beginning. When cameras should be turned on, retention, storage, access, penalties. All these topics have been coming up. Those broad topics have been coming up in these meetings. And what's been interesting is, for example, the ACLU's policy has 6 months with retention storage. Some people wanted it to be a year. I even had a few folks who said they wanted it to be forever. Some people said 3 months. So it's been interesting to gauge the pulse. Most people do come down in the 6 months area. But tonight, please do continue to share based on those parameters. I mean, I think also penalties. People have different ideas, and we've heard different things at different community meetings about what penalties they should be. I think why this is important was I have the ACLU's policy, I have PCAT's policy. I want more ideas and more thoughts. But many ideas come in sort of align with ACLU's. Not all, but some do. So thank you. I have next Mary, and then I have over here.
Hi, my name is Mary Franklin. First of all, anybody believes in accountability to me. But I want to say, I think it's a couple of comments and leave you with a question. First of all, I want to say the last few homicides that were solved in our city were solved by street cameras, community cameras, cameras that were on buildings, people's homes, whatever. Also, I think it's a bigger issue here, besides the cameras, police-run cameras. I think it's really about community policing. That is my opinion. As far as police-run cameras, I'm 50-50. I can't really decide yet, so I'm still trying to figure that out. But the other thing is this. I lost my husband in 1996. I'm going to bring this up for a reason, and I'm going to leave you all with it. Melvin was murdered 20 years ago. His murder is unsolved. A police officer didn't kill my husband. The majority of murders, there's over 900 unsolved homicides in 3 sections of our city. That's Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. They were predominantly on large communities. Those murders have been there since 1970. Those people were killed by people who look like the majority of us in this room. So my thing is this. When is accountability going to come from all of us? For all of us. Police shouldn't kill people wrongfully. People shouldn't kill people wrongfully. So if the cameras come on the officers, they come. My issue is, when do we address who's going to think about these people?
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for sharing. We're gonna go.
How you doing? My name is Cliff Braithwaite, and I speak for the unheard voices in our community.
And thank you for being here.
I try to get them involved, but I'm the peacemaker and the person to give them what the information is. First of all, Old Boston was Old Boston. New Boston is a different piece going on here. But when you want to talk about volunteering, I don't agree with the volunteering part. I think it should be just like when you walk in the MBTA station at an airport, every third person they check to see if they have a bomb, drugs, or whatever. Because if you pencil in a certain officer, the good officers are going to step up, the ones who are not scared will step up and say, yes, I'm a good officer. If we want transparency of the cameras and how people really act, it should be this week, it's this group of officers. No one knows who's it going to be. Because there's some great officers out there that really understand community policing, and just like in life, there's some idiots. Just like there's some good people in the community, just like some people look like me, we're not gangsters, we're not thugs, I'm not a thief, but I might fall into that quota because people don't understand the culture of hip hop. So I would like to see that it's not just hand-picked people. It should rotate, and even some of the captains should have, the ones who are there, the field guys. So, however y'all want to work it, I say the cameras need to be in for the protection for the community as well as the officers. Because sometimes, and I'm not siding on anybody, I'm against anybody who's wrong, right? But sometimes the person getting arrested was wild. The officer had to protect himself. Sometimes it's the other way around. The person, what I would do if an officer was arresting me now that I'm going on 50, not when I was younger. If an officer's grabbing me up now, I'm gonna go like this and be workable and talkable. The young me, no, I probably wouldn't have. But then there's still a way that you can apprehend a suspect without beating him down, without putting his neck on, your knee in his neck. So let's find that balance, but I disagree with the volunteering part. Great, if you want someone to volunteer, let that percentage come out, but then catch the ones who don't want to volunteer. And I'm proud of the new Boston now is, with all our new counselors and the way that the police and everything's going. I really believe now in Boston, we're more of a family if everybody could just look at it as we're family. Because you go home, you have children. We go home, we have children and families. But this has to be settled. And we're one of the top states on making change throughout the United States. So let's put our thinking caps together. Let's get to the people who can figure this out. And let's just do it. Let's be what we are, the first state to do everything right.
First of all, thank you for being here. And also, I saw you had the PPD here, and thank you for being there. And this idea of random selection, a great idea. I've heard it from a couple of other folks. And I hear you about the volunteerism. I want to go right here, and then I have Peter, and then I'll go to Reverend Scott and Joe right in front of me.
Good evening, my name is Abdullah. I excuse my heavy African language.
That's okay.
Before I go to the
But can you
camera,
talk a little louder?
before I talk about the camera, I would say a very short statement. Since the subject matter is safety for everybody, I would like for police profession to go to an academy to know about their profession. But since it's a very public profession, I would like to see some basic knowledge of their professional powers by the government. We have 15 different radios and 15 different TVs. Some of them are public TVs. but I never saw anybody explaining this public about your powers. I don't think one officer asks a citizen to stop, and they run away from him, thinking that they are doing favor for them. It is the law to stop when an officer asks. I don't think somebody who runs away from an officer knows that he's creating a problem for himself, for ourselves at that moment. So I would, if the public, including me or standing with me, know a lot or something at least, the basis of what the police job is, would have increased it or at least have a fight on all crimes in our city. So when it comes to the camera, in my culture we say, when labor comes, labor, there's no labor, there is no hiding. I mean, there's no hiding. About the camera, when there is a crime committed somewhere, there's no hiding, there's no privacy. You deal it with the camera, I mean with the crime. So everything in that scene should be recorded by someone. It can be filtered later. There is some very, very private thing recorded, but the whole scene should be recorded by it. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to move right over here to the right. Thank you for being here.
Hi, I live in the neighborhood. My name is Christina White, and I just want to say that I share some of the concerns other people brought up, but I'm also wondering about release of the footage after the cameras are used. I know that there are privacy issues, but I also know that in some places, the footage has not been released. The city basically has made the determination when to release or if to release, and I think there needs to be community input into that. And I think we have, people have mentioned the Camera Action Team and ACLU and other organizations which have spent months, working on this issue and talking to different people. And, I don't pretend to have to spend that amount of time. I know there's a lot of delicate issues to sort out, but I think that those organizations who've been working on this for, in some cases, years, ought to be really listened to.
I agree. And, thank you for that comment. Why we still have, I'm going to sort of make my way around, but why we still have a decent amount of people in the room, probably should have done this before we left. I just want to quickly poll sort of two questions. We did this at the other community meetings, and it was a good thing. One, how many people in here, just by show of hands, are in favor of the body cameras? Okay, and how many people would say they're not or are 50-50? Okay. How many people not totally, you don't need them? Okay. Second question. How many people are okay with an officer going to a threshold door with their camera on, and if given consent by whoever opens the door, they're allowed to come into the home with the camera on? If you're okay with that, raise your hand. Let me repeat it again. The officer comes to a house, has his camera on, standing at the house, knocks on the door, he's been called there for whatever reason. The person opens the door. If the officer receives consent from that person and is allowed to then enter, how many people are okay with that? Raise your hand.
You mean consent to come in with camera?
Exactly. Consent come in with the camera on. How many people don't want an officer coming in their house with a camera on regardless of consent? They don't want it. Raise your hand. Okay. Follow-up question to that. Do folks who who agree with, once an officer has consent to come into your home, that there should be exceptions for domestic violence, child abuse, a mental health breakdown, or something else, that there should be built-in exceptions around those things. Raise your hand. How many people think there should be built-in exceptions for domestic violence?
There should be.
Okay.
I think they said that I didn't get the last.
Our children. Yes. Okay. These are just some of the things that we talked about, so it's nice to get a sense of what people are sort of thinking and what the rule looks like. I just have one more follow-up polling question, and we'll go to this question related to polling. The last question is, in terms of retention, how long we should keep this coverage of the cameras. So how many people think we should keep the cameras the footage from the cameras for 3 months?
As opposed to what?
As opposed to longer time. 6 months, raise your hand. A year.
Yes, or more.
Longer than a year. Forever. Okay. Jen, you want to say something related to the polling question?
Yeah. I guess I would just like for clarification about the footage if an officer has been given consent and goes into a home where there's been domestic violence or child abuse. And I guess my question is this: if they've been given consent and there is video of that violence or that abuse, could that then be taken by the victim of that violence or that abuse and used in a court of law? And if so, would that change people's perceptions of whether the camera should be kept on or not?
Okay, well, I'm not going to say
I mean, I would say one of the concerns that's come up is one person may give consent and another person may not.
Yeah.
Most interactions don't involve, or many interactions, or maybe it's most, involve more than one individual.
Okay. I want to go back to people asking or making general questions and comments, leaving the polling alone. So I agree. Who did I say was next? I said Reverend Scott. Can you introduce yourself? And actually, Reverend Scott is on the Social Justice Task Force, and I'd like to go to the gentleman who's right in front of me.
Yes.
The gentleman over here, this gentleman, Ron Sapp.
Reverend Mark Scott, I'm a member of the Social Justice Task Force. I'm the associate pastor of the Azusa Christian Community, which is right over in Four Corners. And just two quick questions that I wanted to sort of get into this environment form. One, is there any kind of a way to have a dialogue with the police officers to get their ideas and thoughts and feelings about what it would be like before we get to collective bargaining and beyond the pilot, that we begin to incorporate, what the working conditions, what this was tested out with the people who were actually wearing the equipment. And then the second one related to the question up here, regardless of what our policy is, could any of this be subpoenaed? I think that would be yes, but I'm not a lawyer or in that field at all. Subpoenaed by either a victim, by a prosecutor, by a defense attorney, by a grand jury. How does that factor into this?
There was another question related to subpoenas that has to be considered as a part of the process, the policy discussions, I should say. And I noticed that there were certain folks who had different opinions on that, even some people who were on the Social Justice Task Force. So I don't have all the answers to that, but that's definitely a question that came up. In terms of your first question, yes, we can do that. I mean, I think at some of the meetings we've had some officers come and participate. Obviously, people are currently in uniform, are sitting there listening, and I actually want to applaud them. All of the community meetings, top brass has showed up, they've listened. I know we're constantly talking about the commissioner, the superintendent actually was the last two, but we don't acknowledge the folks that are in the room that have been coming to these meetings. They're very much connected to these conversations, and I want to just right now acknowledge you for being here. And I appreciate that you sit there and you listen and you take it all in with the hopes of bringing us all back as we shape the policy. So thank you. But I think there's been conversations about how we do that, and I think as a member of the task force, I'd love to work with you and some others to think about how we do that, how we engage with more officers. And there's some other counselors I think who are interested in doing that as well. I want to, as I'm looking at the time winding down, I want to be respectful of folks' time. I want to go to the gentleman in the front who hasn't spoken, and then right over here. Hi, thank you for being here.
Thank you. This is great. My name is Anthony Thomas. I work for Senator Sonny Chambliers. I'm a point person at Public Safety, and I think this is great. So one of my questions is, will there be this type of ongoing process as the cameras are going? I'm sorry if this is already reviewed. I was at I also have a question. My next question is, who reviews the footage and who has access to the footage?
So, yes, the process, this is an ongoing process. So I'm already thinking about the possibility of doing more meetings. So some folks brought up about East Boston, particularly looking at communities that have never even had a community meeting like this related to the issue of body cameras. So we're thinking about possibly Roxbury. The only reason we didn't start with Roxbury is because Roxbury actually had some community meetings on the issue of body cameras, not necessarily by the council, but by other organizations like the NAACP. Some of my staff actually went to those meetings, but there's some communities like Dorchester, Rossdale, Charlestown, East Boston, Northern, all these other neighborhoods who never had a meeting. So we're trying to prioritize other neighborhoods. And just this idea of giving them information about the powder building. But that being said, we continue to have process. Our next thing is on Tuesday, May 3rd, we will have a full city council hearing on body cameras down at City Hall. It starts at 4. Please feel free to come. There's public testimony. And that will be more formalistic because it's an actual formal hearing. So feel free to come down there and also participate and encourage others. Also related to process, not everyone comes to community meetings. Not everyone comes to civic associations. So we're encouraging folks to not only take the information that's here, but also take it, deliver it. We encourage them to call our office, email us. Many folks have emailed us their thoughts and concerns, some saying, I don't want this, some saying, I want it, this is my concern. That's helpful too. So I encourage you to do that as well. As far as the access question, we were talking about this earlier when it comes to third-party vendors, BPD, storage. We're still talking about this. Right now, it looks like BPD would maintain the cloud, but then there's also conversations about whether a third party should do that. So that's still a conversation we can have. One thing is alleged victims are allowed access to footage. If you want to add a little bit more, Superintendent Daly, feel free.
Yes, the video data will be public record, so it could be access to a freedom of information request. But there are also issues with people who are not involved in the incident, and we would be concerned about their privacy. So one of the technologies we'll be looking at is ways to blur or redact people's faces out before we release video pursuant to a freedom of information. And that's one of the questions that we're balancing.
We'll go right here and we'll go with that.
Thank you. So my name's Sean, and I'm a Dorchester resident. And
thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's great. My question is about the blurred lines of, so cameras catch only what cameras catch, and as one perspective, and what I'm kind of wondering what the problem would be for both the officers and the civilians to be able to give the other elements of the story. You know, like, how, and then who kind of makes those, if those are, who decides?
Yeah. So that's a great question. That actually came up at the Charlestown meeting from a student, actually, who talked about the angle and perspective of a camera. Jack McDevitt really responded beautifully to this, saying sometimes you have the camera catching this, but then another camera may catch this. So when accounting what happened, there are some question marks looking at what other context, what other cameras, what else could be useful in shaping a fuller story. So it's something that he's considering. They're thinking about how they do that. He's more of an expert in looking at what other municipalities across the country are doing. but it's definitely a big concern.
So you'd
Because the
be able
camera
to
doesn't even get what
Always,
the camera doesn't even get what the police officer is looking at.
only
That's
if the
your
police
point.
officer's looking at it.
What?
only where his body is facing.
Only where
Exactly.
exactly, but not, you know, not, but then I guess you could read body language, maybe you'll be able to say, oh, this person looks threatened.
I mean, it
versus-
leaves some judgment.
Right, but also, the idea also, sort of a possible solution was, do we send officers out with 2 officers at a time with each with a camera? So he's thinking creatively about how do you get around that if there's only this side and there's nothing else? Or are there ways to create another angle perspective, particularly to get more of a full picture?
And is that the be all end all? Is there any avenue in which the citizen can say, this is also what I saw, versus just the camera?
I think so.
Yeah,
And I think
great.
always looking at a fuller picture, particularly if there's, no, this happened, no, this happened. So thank you for that question. It's something we have to consider. I'm going to go back over here, and then I'm going to go to, I have 2 minutes left. I have 2 more, 1 and 2. You can talk afterwards. I'm not leaving.
So this is just a policy point about the consent issue with entering a residence. It seemed, I mean, my gut reaction was that only a homeowner or a leaseholder should be able to give consent for a police officer to come in and film. Like, not just the person who answers the door. That was just my gut reaction. And the other part, just a little statement, and that is, we know that a camera is not a cure-all, right? And we know that even though we're trying to build trust, a camera actually sends a signal that perhaps there's a significant lack of trust. So with this opportunity, the obstacle that we're trying to overcome with the cameras, that this opportunity, we would take advantage of that as well for building, stronger relationships. That is looked at as a package deal. We're doing the cameras here, but there's also an increased effort to build positive interactions, positive relationships with law enforcement in different areas.
No, thank you for that. And then we have 2 more, and then we have to wrap it up because I want to be respectful of the time. Here, and then we'll go.
Hi, my name is Cameron.
Cameron, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm a member of the Harvard
It's setting up.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm a member of the Harvard Black Law Student Association. Last year we offered a report and model legislation on body cameras that we'd like to offer to the table. We weren't sure if it was available to the general public, and we'd like to at least passing that information available to the public.
Oh, no, that'd be great. Is that
Yeah.
separate from ECAT's policy? I thought you guys worked together.
They did help us pose this policy, but they may have some other, information.
That would be great. So yes, and if you want to leave, if you have physical copies tonight, you want to leave so people can take with them, that would be great too.
Definitely.
If not, definitely get that to us.
Sure. So on to my question. It actually relates to the previous gentleman's question about entering the home. I think it's really important for us to kind of recognize whether we want to have an opt-in system versus an opt-out system for the cameras. You mentioned that previous concern about having a leaseholder be able to give consent. That's the reason that I didn't really want to raise my hand and say that a police officer should have the camera on and then ask for consent. I think that it should be off before consent is given, then offer that opportunity for us to be able to really control how our images are being used in police custody and whether it is taken in the first place. Thank you.
That's a great point, and actually came up at another meeting. A woman said, you imagine an officer coming to a door, or coming to a home, or coming to a rental unit or an apartment, and it being tense, things are happening fast, and if the camera's already on, forgetting to even ask for consent, forgetting to seek consent, just sort of happening, versus if it's off, then it's more of a safety measure than if it's on. So that's a great point. Thank you for it. And please, if you have copies, leave it here. If not, definitely send it to us. We will have things at the hearing, so we want to put that stuff out.
Thank you.
We're going to end over here because we have to wrap up and get out of this building.
My name is Carla Sheffield.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for holding these because I think they're very important. I'm only for body cameras because my son was killed by a Boston police officer. But I work with police officers every day. My thing is, when I was growing up, we had Officer Friendly come to the school. My 12-year-old knows a Boston police officer killed her brother. So all she sees is what comes on TV. I try to shield her from that, what she knows about my son. So in addition to these body cameras and all the things that we're coming up with, I think going back to Officer Friendly, visiting the kids in kindergarten and elementary, starting early, let them see that there are good officers, because that's missing. Compassion's gone, a whole bunch of respect is gone, and we need to bring that back to the schools, to our kids, because most parents aren't doing it. So it takes everybody, we need to get back to that.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing. As the only teacher, I'm a counselor.
So I was formerly a teacher in Boston Public Schools before I elected to the council. And we actually had our hearing today with the Boston Police Department. One of the things that I've advocated for, at my school, we have a great relationship. The school as a community, a great relationship with the Boston police officers that were partnered with the school. And one of my questions and asks was for us to make sure that we continue those relationships across the school system in a very sort of productive and proactive way. Because there are important, relationships to build, but there's also important community building that needs to happen and information sharing between what's happening in the community and what happens in schools. Because as much as schools are part of our neighborhoods, they really do become incredibly isolated from sort of the world around them, the community around them. So it's something that we talked quite a bit about today during that hearing, and something that I'm confident that Boston Police is working to, and that's on the productive piece. I'm also, I've asked Boston Commissioner Evans to be vigilant about doing active shooter training in our schools, and it's not what we're talking about today, but it's something that as a system, as a city, as a state, we've been incredibly fortunate that we haven't had any sort of mass casualty incidences in our schools the way the rest of the world. And as a teacher, it's something that whenever we hear of those incidents, it's heart-wrenching, it's frightening, it's all of those things for the adults, never mind the children. And that's who we're worried about, to making sure that we're sort of doing all of those things, both in our schools and with partnership.
Thank you. One thing I'm always cognizant of is people's time. I want to say this is the beginning of many conversations. The next one will be at the hearing on Tuesday, May 3rd. It will be starting at 4 o'clock. If you cannot attend that hearing, we accept testimony. You can call us. You can take notes on the phone. We want to hear from more people. I think it's important that we get all the policies that are written down, of course, and consider those, particularly for people, from folks who have been working in this for a really long time. I'm respectful and cognizant of that, but I also want to hear other thoughts and ideas and make sure we're considering those things as well. I want to thank Top Brass. I always feel very much protected and safe for being here for all the community meetings. I'll see you guys, I'm sure, at the hearing. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Jack Hearn, Father Jack Hearn, for being here. I want to thank the other social justice task force members. I want to thank Councilor Lisa Sabi George. I also want to just thank all of you for coming out tonight. It's the beginning of many conversations, but thank you for being here. Out of all the community meetings, this was the best turnout in District 4, so I'm excited. So thank you so much.